Power distance. Power distance is the extent to which lower-ranking individuals of a society accept and expect that power is distributed unequally. In cultures with a high power distance, people accept a deeply hierarchical system of power with little to no need for justification. The opposite is true of cultures with a low power distance. These cultures reflect a loose hierarchical power distribution. Ethiopia has a high score on the power distance scale at 70. This is compared to the United States, which has a more balanced score of 40. From this, one might reason that an ideal workplace in Ethiopia would be controlled by a benevolent autocrat, and that said workplace would be centered around the power of that person. People in this workplace expect to be told what to do by their boss, and likely address said boss with an honorific title. The ideal U.S. workplace is a more egalitarian affair. However, there is still a generally recognized hierarchy in place. That said, an employee in the U.S. is far more likely to be on a friendly first-name basis with their boss than an employee in Ethiopia. Individualism. Individualism addresses the degree of interdependence a society maintains among its members. Individualistic societies favor an individually oriented sense of self. Members of these cultures view most things through the perspective of I. Conversely, collectivistic societies favor a sense of self related to groups. Ethiopia and the U.S. are more or less polar opposites in this respect, with Ethiopia scoring a 20 and the U.S. scoring a 91. Ethiopia favors the idea of in-group loyalty and strong bonds with other members of the group. Again, members of such a culture view the world in the scope of we rather than I. The U.S. scoring a 91 here is about as obvious a result as is possible. In the U.S., we favor individuality, personal achievement, and while we maintain strong bonds with family and friends, we conceptualize the world in an I sense.
Masculinity. Masculinity, according to Hofstede, determines what motivates people in a society. Cultures with high masculinity tend to be driven by competition, achievement, and success. On the other hand, feminine societies are driven by caring for others and quality of life. Ethiopia is a masculine society. This can be contributed largely due to their warriorhood mentality. Ethiopia ranks 65 compared to the United States, who ranks 62, according to Greer-Hofstede's cultural analysis. This is because in Ethiopia, military prowess offers a royal road to prestige and legitimacy, as well as ascendance to a powerful warlordship, and retains lifted material values to a dominant position.
The dimension uncertainty avoidance has to do with the way that society deals with the fact that the future can never be known. Should we try to control the future or just let it happen? This ambiguity brings with it anxiety, and different cultures have learnt to deal with this anxiety in different ways. The extent to which the members of a culture feel threatened by ambiguous or unknown situations have created beliefs and institutions that try to avoid these, reflected in the score on uncertainty avoidance. The dimension long-term orientation describes how every society has to maintain some link with its own past while dealing with the challenges of the present and future. The societies prioritize these two existential goals differently. Normative societies, which score low on this dimension, for example, prefer to maintain time-honored traditions and norms, while viewing societal change with suspicion. Those with a culture which score high, on the other hand, take a more pragmatic approach. They encourage thrift and efforts in modern education as a way to prepare for the future.
Indulgence. The dimension of indulgence is defined as the extent to which people try to control their desires and impulses. This is based on the way they were raised. Weak control is called indulgence, and strong control is called resistance. Ethiopia has no measure of this because it is still a developing country. Therefore, the culture doesn't have much to indulge in.
Communicating. The defining characteristic of low-context cultures is explicit communication. In these cultures, few details are left to interpretation. Facts and figures, as well as intentions and ideas, tend to be more directly stated. The United States is an example of a low-context culture. Ethiopia, however, is a high-context culture. This essentially means that communication in Ethiopia is highly nuanced, to the extent that much of any message being given is left up to the interpretation of the receiving party. An Ethiopian immigrant to the United States might have serious issues with this concept. Evaluating. The United States tends to favor a balance between direct and indirect negative feedback, meaning that criticism is given freely but in a fairly gentle, non-confrontational way. Ethiopia is very similar to the United States in this respect, leaning just slightly more towards the indirect side. This would pose little challenge for an Ethiopian immigrant to the United States.
Persuading. Ethiopia conceptualizes persuasion holistically rather than by applications or concepts. Thus, it does not score on this scale.
Leading. In terms of leadership, the United States serves as a benchmark for a balance between hierarchical and egalitarian workplaces. Ethiopia lies to an extreme on this scale. Specifically, Ethiopia is deeply hierarchical in nature. In the U.S., for example, one might have a comfortable relationship with their boss, maybe even referring to them by their first name. In Ethiopia, this is decidedly unlikely. You would likely refer to your superiors with honorific titles such as sir or ma'am. Ethiopian immigrants to the U.S. might have a tough time adjusting to this.
Deciding. Egalitarian cultures are the ones that tend to be most consensual, and the most hierarchical ones are the ones where the boss makes top-down decisions. Ethiopia fits this model because Ethiopia is a hierarchical culture, which means when it comes to decision-making, instead of a group effort, it is one order given and handed down from person to person. This fits the Ethiopian warhood mentality. Trusting. Ethiopia is a relationship-based culture, most likely because Ethiopian family structure is much larger compared to countries like the United States. The oldest male is usually the patriarch of the family, carrying out all the decisions for the family. Another factor could be that higher education acceptance rate is approximately 20% of all the individuals who take the tests. This can translate as individuals are less likely to interact with others who they do not have some type of relationship with. This quality might pose an issue for Ethiopian immigrants in the U.S. in that,
Disagreement. Some cultures embrace confrontation while others avoid it. The scale looks at the showing of negative feedback, though with some differences, as certain countries may be further to the left, direct on negative feedback, and further to the right, avoiding confrontation on disagreeing. Ethiopia is further on the right and avoids confrontation. They scored an 11.1 out of 15. Disagreement and debate is negative for the team or organization, and in so, open confrontation is inappropriate and will break up group harmony or negatively impact the relationship, which is very important in Ethiopian culture due to the fact that they are very close family-knit groups. That different cultures treat time differently is one of the most common observations for anyone working or even traveling abroad. On one extreme, you've got the exceedingly precise, and on the other, you have the loose and flexible. Ethiopia scores a 14.4 out of 15 and is considered very flexible. This means project steps are approached in a fluid manner, changing tasks as opportunities arise. Many things are dealt with at once, and interpretations are accepted. The focus is on adaptability, and flexibility is valued over organization.
Power distance. Power distance is the extent to which lower-ranking individuals of a society accept and expect that power is distributed unequally. In cultures with a high power distance, people accept a deeply hierarchical system of power with little to no need for justification. The opposite is true of cultures with a low power distance. These cultures reflect a loose hierarchical power distribution. Ethiopia has a high score on the power distance scale at 70. This is